Have you ever taken on a new role in life and you, in the middle of starting something new, realized you felt like a complete fraud? Like you were an imposter, you were wearing somebody else's clothes, and you're like, I hope people don't figure out I don't have a clue what I'm doing. Maybe it was your first day on a new job, or you joined a new club or a new sports team, and you were just kind of faking it till you make it. For me, it was the first morning I woke up with kids in my house. So the state had given us a certificate that said we were foster parents. That did not mean that we knew anything about being parents. So we had a 7 and 8-year-old dropped into our house. We put them to bed, and we woke up the next morning to the smell of smoke. They were burning eggs on the stove at 6 in the morning. And we learned very quickly being a parent means always being aware of everything. And we got door alarms eventually. We had no idea what we were doing. We were imposters, but we were just trying to figure it out. Maybe you've had a boss that you felt like, okay, he has or she has no idea what she is doing. Maybe per the HR structure, yes, that person's in charge of you, but you realize very quickly they're in charge of nothing because they don't know anything about what they're supposed to be doing. Maybe in that situation you found out, oh, they're a family member of the boss's boss. Or you sat there scratching your head going, okay, maybe they've got blackmail material like on somebody important. Maybe that's how they got their position. But you knew they had no business being in that role of a manager. So either way, you recognize there had to have been a secondary reason because their competence and their experience did not match up to what it should have been. If you've ever been a fan of The Office and you are familiar with Michael Scott, there are many moments where you watch him as the manager and you're just thinking, how did he ever get that position of manager of the Scranton branch office? And yes, there are a few bright spots and you go, okay, he's a good salesman. He has no right being a manager. And the problem when you leave somebody in leadership who's an imposter is that the rest of the structure underneath just feels completely frustrated and disillusioned because they're like, how can we follow this guy who should not be leading us? So you see, when someone's put into that position, everybody can always tell. Even our foster kids were like, you guys haven't had kids before, have you? Like, they called us out on it. And you can either say, you're right, I don't know what I'm doing, and I'm trying to figure it out. Or what a lot of people do when they're trying to cover is they pretend like they know what they're doing, and they just get real mad if anybody challenges them on it. And because they feel threatened, and they want everybody to know, no, I know what I'm doing, and I belong here. And that's actually a little bit of the story that we are going to talk about today. You see, as you go through the Bible, we left off last week with Saul and David, but after that, there is a long list of imposter kings, leaders over the nation of Israel who have no business whatsoever leading God's people. And then when a qualified rightful king of Israel is born, it became a massive threat to the one who was wearing the crown at that time because he knew he did not belong. So, we're in this series, Crowned, the King of Kings is where we've been. And we've been looking at all the kings of Israel from beginning to end. And we began with God as the original king. He led and guided Israel through people like Moses, the prophet, and Joshua, a judge, and then a whole list of judges, but there were no kings. But the people wanted to be like the rest of the nations of the world, and they demanded a king from God, a human king. And so God gave them exactly what they asked for. He gave them Saul. He was tall, he was handsome, he's exactly what the people thought of when they thought of a king. The problem was, as we saw last week, Saul's heart was garbage on the inside. He was unwilling to follow God, and as a result, he made for a terrible king. So God replaced Saul with a guy who had a heart after God's, and that was David. David was chosen because not what people saw on the outside, but because of what God saw on the inside and knew how David would live and how he would lead based on his heart. So the book of 2 Samuel is mostly a book of David and him being the leader and the king of Israel. And then when you get to 1st and 2nd Kings, you start going through a long lineage of new kings of Judah who are all the descendants of the line of David. And so all of them are in the line of David, which is exactly what God promised at the end of David's life, when God said there would always be a king, forever his throne would reign. The problem is, in that long line of David's kings that we read about in the books of 1st and 2nd Kings in our Bible, is some are good, some are bad, but they tend to get progressively worse. Until eventually God says, look, your kings, your leadership, your nation, you're a mess and you don't follow me anymore. So the consequence is what I told you it'd be back in the covenant I gave to Moses. I'm going to have you conquered by another nation that's much bigger and much more powerful than you. And that's when in 597 BC, the king of Babylon had his troops go in, lay siege to Jerusalem, and take everybody from the city of Jerusalem back home to Babylon in exile. And for 70 years, all the people of Jerusalem were living in Babylon as exiles under the rule of King Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian king. So it's into this situation that we're looking today. I walked you through some history. We're landing ourselves in Daniel chapter 2 today. So Daniel is a book of the prophets, but where it lands, it's a story about these nobles who were taken out of Jerusalem and brought into the king's palace. Particularly, it follows Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, okay? Maybe you've heard those names. There's some really famous Sunday school stories around them. But Daniel writes, he's at the very beginning of this time that the Israelites are under their first imposter king, King Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian king. He has no business being the king over the Israelites, but he's the first of what would be many. So the backdrop to our story today, and we're going to be in Daniel 2, we're going to read a lengthy chunk, is that King Nebuchadnezzar had a dream. And he wanted it to be interpreted. But he knew that if he told his wise men what the dream was, they could say, well, this is what it means. And he had no idea if they were just lying or if they actually knew something. And so to test them, he said, don't just tell me the interpretation. Tell me what the dream was first, and then tell me the interpretation. And then I'll know that you actually know something and you're not just telling me what you think I want to hear. And they said, King, in Daniel chapter 2, verse 11. What the king asks is too difficult. No one can reveal it to the king except the gods. They're like, nobody knows what was in your mind during a dream except the gods. Well, at that point, the king got angry. He said, okay, we're going to have all you wise men, you're dead. Well, Daniel was part of that group of nobles. He found out, he's like, whoa, hold on, give me a moment. He prays to God. God gives him a vision of what the dream was and the meaning of the dream. And so what I love about this passage is that God does what only he can do. Like the wise men said, nobody can know what dream you had and the meaning of it. And then God shows Daniel exactly that. We worship a God who can do what nobody else can do. We need to remember that. There are moments in your life where you look at something and you say, that's impossible. There's no way I'm getting through this situation. There's no way that it's so hopeless and so dark, I never want to go through this. I want to be done. And we have to understand, we worship a God who can do what nobody else can do. They said, only the gods can do this. And God said, yep, that's me. I can do this. And he tells Daniel exactly that. So that's the story that we come into. We're picking up Daniel chapter 2, verse 26. You'll understand why we're here in the middle of a Christmas series in a little bit. Okay, verse 26. The king asked Daniel, also called Belshazzar, are you able to tell me what I saw in my dream and interpret it? Daniel replied, no wise man, enchanter, magician, or diviner can explain to the king the mystery he is asked about. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. He's shown King Nebuchadnezzar what will happen in days to come. Your dream and the visions that passed through your mind are what you are as you were lying in bed are these. As your majesty was lying there, your mind turned to things to come, and the revealer of mysteries showed you what is going to happen. As for me, this mystery has been revealed to me, not because I have greater wisdom than anyone else alive, but so your majesty may know the interpretation and that you may understand what went through your mind. Your majesty looked, and there before you stood a large statue, an enormous, dazzling statue, awesome in appearance. The head of the statue is made of pure gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, and its feet partly of iron and partly of baked clay. While you were watching, a rock cut out, but not by human hands. It struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and smashed them. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were all broken to pieces and became like chaff on a threshing floor in the summer. The wind swept them away without leaving a trace. But the rock that struck the statue became a huge mountain, and it filled the whole earth. This was the dream, and now we will interpret it to the king. Your majesty, you are the King of kings. The God of heaven has given you dominion and power and might and glory. Let me pause there. Daniel calls King Nebuchadnezzar the King of Kings. That's kind of a title for God. But we also see what Daniel follows it up with. Yeah, King Neb, you're in charge of a huge empire right now, but don't ever forget that the God of heaven is the one who gave it to you. Like ultimately, God's still the one in charge. The only reason you're in this position is because God put you in this position. But from human standpoint, King Nebuchadnezzar reigned over more territory and more people than any empire through history to that point. He truly was a king of all these other kingdoms. And that's what Daniel was stepping into there as he said that. So, the king was big time. And we've seen this statue in 4 parts: gold, silver, bronze, and iron. That's the dream. The rock that comes and it hits it, and the entire statue breaks up, and it becomes like dust and the chaff that's blown away. Now we see the interpretation, picking up in verse 38. In your hands he has placed all mankind and the beasts of the field and the birds of the sky. Wherever they live, he has made you ruler over them all. You are that head of gold. After you, another kingdom will arise, inferior to yours. Next, a third kingdom, one of bronze, will rule over the whole earth. Finally, there will be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron. For iron breaks and smashes everything. And as iron breaks things to pieces, so it will crush and break all the others. Jumping down to verse 44. In the time of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, nor will it be left to another people. It will crush all those kingdoms and bring them to an end, but it will itself endure forever. This is the meaning of the vision of the rock cut out of a mountain, but not made by human hands, a rock that broke the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold to pieces. The great God has shown the king what will take place in the future. The dream is true, and its interpretation is trustworthy. So we've got this lengthy dream, this lengthy interpretation. We see King Nebuchadnezzar as this King of Kings. He is the gold at the top of the statue. It is the empire of Babylon. He captured Jerusalem. He is the first of the many imposter kings that are to come. As you read through the rest of the book of Daniel, though, King Nebuchadnezzar is killed. And in his place rules a man from Medes. And ultimately, the Medes and the Persians become the next great empire. They conquer all of Babylon. And when we were in the book of Esther in our last series, we had King Xerxes. He was from the kingdom of Persia, another nation that had no business ruling over Israel. And yet that's the position they found themselves in. Next, you had the Greeks The Greeks ended up conquering the Persians. That's why King Xerxes tried to go into Greece and take them out as they were a growing empire, but he wasn't strong enough to. The Greeks became too great. They took over the Persians. We don't have any part of the Greek empire in our Bibles because that occurred during the 400 year, the silent years, between the last prophet in our Bibles, Malachi, and the first of the Gospels where Jesus was born. In those 400 silent years, that's when the Greeks ruled. Jesus was then born into the Roman Empire, which was represented by that iron in the dream. I mean, you can see here, in roughly the year 590 BC, a dream is given to King Nebuchadnezzar that fits very clearly with the next 600 years of history and the major empires that ruled throughout the earth. God was able to give a vision or a dream to Nebuchadnezzar and give the interpretation to Daniel. No human could have known that. But it just proves there is a God who knows all. He knows the beginning from the end. We worship that God, and Daniel did as well. So I know this is a lot of history, but I hope you're able to follow how we got from David, who we talked about last week as the ideal king, and then through his line of kings, the imposter kings, and then we get to this king who ruled at the time of Jesus. Okay? He is the last of the imposter kings. He ruled over Judea, and that was King Herod. He was put there by the Romans. And an important piece of Herod the Great story, he was known as Herod the Great, was that he was an Idumean. Okay, Idumean means they're people from the Edomites. The Edomites were Israel's enemy all through the Bible. Why is that? The Israelites, we have to understand, was from a man named Jacob, and God changed Jacob's name to Israel. He had a brother named Esau. Esau was supposed to be in the line of Abraham. He was supposed to be the one that was all God's people went through his line. But he was careless and he sold his birthright. Maybe you've heard that story. It's an old Sunday school story. But so Esau, who's the head of the Edomites, was the brother of Israel, where all the people of Israel come from. So when Rome put this Idumean in charge of the Israelites, he absolutely knew he was not from the line of Israel. He was not from the line of David. He knew he was an imposter, absolutely. But to the Romans, they're like, that's close enough. It's a brother. The people of Israel knew that he was an imposter who had no right to be leading them at this time of Jesus. And so we have to understand, if Herod knew he was an imposter king, then what comes next in the Gospel of Matthew had a huge implication for his leadership. In Matthew chapter 2, verse 1, we read about this, the last of the imposter kings. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews?" Now, remember, Herod is king of Judea. So for them to come and say, "Where's the king of the Jews?" It's like, where's the real king? We don't recognize you as king. That's how he would have heard it. We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him. When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed. Yeah, he was disturbed. He knew he didn't belong. And the only way that he could stay king was to have nobody else fighting against him or claiming the rightful throne of the kingdom. And so in his mind right away, he's like, this isn't good. We've got to take care of this. So what happened is these wise men went and they visited Jesus in Bethlehem. But as we saw today, you guys already got the pre-show, they were warned in a dream, don't go back to Herod because he wants to kill this child. So they went another way. Mary and Joseph were warned as well. You guys need to get out of here. Herod was so corrupt and so hell-bent on eliminating this threat to his kingship. He did what none of us can even imagine in verse 16. When Herod realized that he had been outwitted by the Magi, he was furious. And he gave orders to kill all the boys of Bethlehem and its vicinity who were 2 years old and under. Think about what would drive a man to have dozens of adorable little babies and toddlers murdered within his own people that he was charged to lead and protect. Let's understand this moment, though, was a lot bigger than this single horrific decision by King Herod. This was a spiritual attack by Satan himself, trying to wipe out the Son of God before he was ever old enough to defend himself. This piece of Herod saying, let's have all the babies and all those under 2 years old murdered, that was not just a human aspect. That was the heavens raging. That was Satan himself, the enemy of God, trying to get a jump on this and say, no, I'm going to win this battle for myself. But God knows all, and he can do what only God can do. So he made sure to protect Jesus by sending the Magi a different way and warning Mary and Joseph to head to Egypt. So that's where this idea of imposter kings ties into the Christmas story. An imposter was ruling when the true king from the line of David finally came to this earth. But let's go back to Daniel to see what God promised would happen to all these imposters. Back in verse 44 and 45, it said, in the time of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, nor will it be left to another people. It will crush all those kingdoms and bring them to an end, but it will itself endure forever. 590 years before Jesus' birth, God was already speaking through this prophet Daniel about how his kingdom would never again be destroyed. It would never again be left to an imposter king like Herod. God's kingdom would be established, and it would overtake all the other kingdoms of the earth. It would endure forever. While Daniel called Nebuchadnezzar the King of Kings, truly God's kingdom would be led by the rightful King of Kings, the Christ child, the one who came and was laid in a manger. If you continue reading through that verse, what we see is this is the meaning of the vision of the rock cut out of the mountain, but not by human hands, a rock that broke the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold to pieces. That rock that broke all the kingdoms to pieces, including it broke Rome apart itself. That rock is the rightful King of Kings who was to come, and that is Jesus, the one who came to establish God's kingdom on this earth. Jesus Christ. He changed everything. And here's where this message about foreign kings who tried to rule over Israel actually makes a difference in each one of your lives. We all live in this kingdom of God where Jesus deserves to be the rightful king in our lives. But we're also surrounded by imposter kings who are vying for your attention and your affection. I mean, think about it. Imposter kings are things that don't deserve to be leading you and guiding you. They're going to make a mess of your life. It's like that manager that you're like, you don't really know what you're doing and you're making my life worse. This world's full of them, but we fall for it. Hook, line, and sinker. Money tries to win your heart and say, you know what? If all you can get is more of me, finally you'll be happy. The reason you're not happy is because you don't have enough of me. Work harder, work more hours, find a job that pays better. But if you have more of me, then you'll be happy. The news media tries to tell you this political party is going to save you from the other side. Put your hope in this political party, this president or that candidate. And then you'll have everything work out for you. Even our political system in America, while democracy works a heck of a lot better than the other systems, it's not the kingdom of God, and let's not confuse the two of them. Our democracy won't save us. Jesus saves us. Lust whispers in your ear, what you really need is just to be loved. So follow your emotions without any boundaries and do what feels best, and then you'll be satisfied. The entertainment industry tells you to just sit there a little bit longer, just swipe one more time, just watch one more episode, just play one more time on that game, and then then you can get up and you can get to doing what you're supposed to be doing. Pride boasts to you, you're so much better and smarter than everybody else. You deserve everything you have accomplished. Look at what you've done on your own. There's all these imposter kings that are trying to grab our attention. And so often we fall for it. And we say, oh, that does sound good. And we put Jesus aside and we're like, okay, you can be a little king over here, but for my life, I'm going to follow this or I'm going to follow that. These are just a few of the possible examples of imposter kings. They're not human, but they have powerful empires in our culture. We recognize that. They have this incredible allure, each one of them trying to increase their own influence and power. And they do that by capturing more and more hearts and people to serve them. Greed just runs rampant through America. And Satan's like, this is amazing because we have to understand, ultimately, Satan is the head of the kingdom of darkness. That's the kingdom that Jesus broke into. And what he's doing is he's using all these little kingdoms of pride and lust and all that the entertainment industry that makes us just lazy as we just sit there on our phones forever. He's using all these little kingdoms to capture each of our attention, as each one of us is wired differently, to draw us away from the rightful king, Jesus Christ. That's Satan's ploy. That's what he's doing. And he does a really good job of it. He's made all these different things because, you know what, one person might be led astray by another person's like, oh, that's not me at all. I'm so much better than that. In fact, you're stupid for doing that. And then you fall right into the trap of pride and following this king of pride and how great you are. And there's only one way to get out of that trap, and it's to say, you know what, I don't want to play this game with Satan, the kingdom of darkness, and all these things trying to pull my attention away. I want to understand there's one king in my life. And anytime I realize I'm veering off course, I want to step back and say, no, I worship the rightful king, the babe who was born in Bethlehem. My hope for each one of you today is that you would take a moment and evaluate, are there any imposter kings that have a foothold in your life? Those imposters aren't seeking your benefit. Understand that. All they're trying to do is keep themselves on the throne and stay front and center in your life. They're trying to hold on to their own power, a power that they know is ultimately going to come to a crushing defeat. There is a rock that is going to smash all the kingdoms of the earth. And it came, and it smashed it, and they have broken. And Satan knows, ultimately, he has defeat right around the corner. And that single rock becomes a holy hill, the mountain, the kingdom of God that we read about in Revelation. That's where we're going next week. So I know today was a lengthy day on history. We've covered a lot of the story of the Old Testament in these 3 weeks, which is probably not what you expected a Christmas series to be about. But come back next week, okay? Next week brings all these building blocks together. And we see how God's been working through thousands of years of history and weaving this theme of what it means to be the king of all of our hearts for all time. So I hope you'll be back next week. I'm excited to bring this whole thing together as we see God do what only he can do through the birth of Jesus Christ. Would you bow your heads with me as we pray?